College Football Nerds here doing our top 10 a little differently. We usually do it on our live show, and we did do a live show. We just did it early this week because Josh has got to get on an airplane, and so we had to get that done early, record some shows afterwards, and that means some games were going on and are still going on before we could call it on our top 10. But it looks like Josh, South Carolina's probably going to win this game, so I'm going to do my top 10 first, and I'm going to do it with the assumption that South Carolina is going to win this game. Starting off, obviously, I got Georgia number 1. They didn't look great today, and we talked on our live show about how they didn't look good against a pretty bad team, or at least a mediocre team, which shows that they're not untouchable. And it kind of squishes all of this 1-4 action where we thought last week maybe that Georgia was head and shoulders above the rest. Number 2, I've got Ohio State ahead of number 3, Michigan. Michigan, I'm concerned. We've talked about it all year. If you can stop the run game, you can stop their offense completely. I'm not sold on them at quarterback. I think that's an issue for them right now, is that they can't win a game through the air, and good defenses can shut down a run game. And Ohio State has the ability with their front seven to shut down a run. Their issue is more in pass defense, and I don't think Michigan has what they need to exploit that. Number 4, I got TCU. TCU had a squeaker today, but everybody has. And so that's tough to, ding them when Ohio State almost lost or could have lost. Michigan could have lost, So from that standpoint, it was a close game against Baylor on the road, but I got them at number 4 because Tennessee is not there anymore because they're going to lose to South Carolina. I've got LSU at number 5. Again, a team that I think that is playing a little bit or ranked a little bit above their overall quality, but it's more related to the struggles that everybody else has got beyond them. They beat the number 16 on my list. That's Alabama. Alabama's still got some issues offensively. I don't think until they don't have a healthy Bryce Young, so until they get a healthy quarterback and they get maybe a new offensive coordinator, I don't think they're going to be right. Penn State for me, Josh, at number 7. And last week they were barely squeaking into the top 10. Penn State at number 7. Their losses were against really good teams. And the thing about Penn State that you can't say about a lot of the teams in the country right now, Josh, they are handling their business against bad teams. They're crushing them. So I think that is a thing that you can't say about other teams that really encourages me if I'm a Penn State fan. I've got Tennessee at number 8 if they lose this game. Now, it looks like Hendon Hooker just got hurt, and it could be really bad, and that could really turn their season in a different direction given that their defense is really not great. But just on merit on this season alone, a team that's going to finish 10-2, a team that's got one of the toughest schedules in the country, I've got them at number 8. Number 9 is the USC-UCLA winner. That game is not over. It's 21-20 at the half. And look, I think that whomever wins deserves to be probably in the top 10, but I'm not sold on either one of these teams being great. Even if USC wins this, and they've just got the one loss, I'm not sold on them being a great team. Almost, had a scare against Arizona, had a scare against Cal. Overall, not a great team, playing in a weaker league, but does deserve credit to be in the top 10 given the clean win-loss record. And I've got Clemson at number 10. Utah would be number 11 for me, just outside of that. Utah lost. Everybody wants to wipe away the loss at Florida. Florida just lost to Vanderbilt. Florida's not a good football team this year. And that, to me, that game counts. Clemson, while they are flawed, I think they're a pretty good football team. Josh, give me your top 10.
Yeah, my top 10 starts with Georgia. I agree with you. I think Georgia has some chinks in their armor. Offensively, they look a little more like 2020 Georgia than they do 2022 at times. They're sort of sputtery. And when they're clicking, they can be really good. But when they're not, they're not. But they still seem like the most consistent team to me. They seem like the most athletic, physical team. I'm not as bothered by a close game against Kentucky maybe as you are. And this gets into a little bit of a philosophy point. I think when you're ranking teams, you have to rank them based off their wins and losses using sort of the quality of their opponent, not the win-loss record of their opponent. And the reason for that is, whether or not you have a good win or not is based off how good the other team was. If you're playing a team that's really inconsistent and has dropped a couple really stupid games, that doesn't mean it was an easy win just because they've rolled out some clunkers. Tennessee probably falls into that boat, but we'll get to them in a minute. My number 2 is Ohio State. I think Ohio State, when they have everything together right now, looks like they probably could be the best team in the country. They haven't had everything together. They've got injury issues at running back that's really limiting them. Offensively, I think C.J. Stroud is actually playing phenomenal football for them for the most part. I think there's a little bit of sort of reading rhythm issues with him, but his ball placement and whatnot was actually really, really good in this last game against Maryland. Sort of everything else that wasn't working great. Michigan, I have number 3. I have the same concerns as you. I think the defense has taken a step back from last year. I think the offense is quite limited. And what they do, they were mainly built around running the football and getting a handful of explosive plays to pull away from teams. They've had a lot of close games that pulled away late based off a couple explosive plays, based off stuff the defense did. And their schedule, frankly, is very weak. And people can try to justify it all they want. You can look at a lot of different metrics, right? I mean, they've got the worst win-loss records of their opponents. In terms of offenses, they've played like a couple in the top 60. Just not a good schedule, but they're still undefeated. I still think they're clearly one of the 3 best teams in the country. I think they have some issues. My number 4 is TCU. I have to give you a lot of credit if you're undefeated, and other teams aren't. It is hard to go undefeated in football. I'm also with you that I don't necessarily have a lot of faith in the Big 12 or, frankly, the Pac-12 this year. A little bit of that is eye test, a little bit of it is exposure. Not a lot of out-of-conference games, though, to judge, which makes it really difficult, and I have to give some benefit of the doubt to that. TCU's offense is very good. I think their defense is pretty suspect. But yeah, with Tennessee falling out, they have to be there. My number 5 is LSU. I think LSU is just sort of floating around there waiting to sneak in the playoffs if a couple breaks come their way. It's actually kind of crazy in that regard. And I think they're a good football team. That loss to Florida State does not look like a bad loss now that Florida State's probably going to end as a 9-3 team, you would guess. And so, yeah, win over Alabama is a big deal. Blowout loss to Tennessee, but in a game where their starting left tackle and left guard were lost that morning, one to illness that morning, one to injury early in the game, and they had no offensive line depth. So when those guys went down, one of them, which was a true freshman, they didn't really have any plan B answer. And that kind of crippled them. So that's sort of a huge asterisk for LSU in understanding where their 2 losses came from. One was week 1 against a team that had actually gotten to play in week 0, where they were more prepared late in the game. The other one, a game against Tennessee where they did get blown out, but in a game where their offensive line just collapsed due to a unique injury situation. USC, if they win, is my number 6, and that's the best I could do because I can't record this after that game finishes. I don't, again, have a ton of faith in USC. I think the USC UCLA winner is almost more likely than not to lose before the season's over. But right now, with 1 loss, it's hard to put them a lot lower. I don't view the Utah loss as a good loss or even a neutral loss. I view it as a bad loss. But they've got 1 loss, and you're going to see teams behind them all have major warts. The next of which may be a little controversial, it's Alabama. So, assuming USC wins, it'd be my number, what are we on now, 7. Alabama is a 2-loss team with one of the most difficult schedules in the country. Their 2 losses were both on the road. They have some really good wins. The wins over Ole Miss is really good. A win over Texas is a good win. At least it's as good as anything TCU can claim at the moment, for example. And so it's hard for me to drop them a lot further. The next team on my list being Clemson with 1 loss, sort of a similar conversation. The ACC is not great, and they had a lot of close games, and importantly, they had a blowout loss to a not very good Notre Dame team. And it's hard for me to excuse that. And yeah, a blowout loss to a bad team is going to put you behind a team that has more losses than you have in my book. I don't think it was an accomplishment to have a 1-loss schedule with Clemson's schedule. And I think most of frankly, every team we've talked about to this point, in my view, probably would be undefeated with Clemson's schedule. My number 9, assuming USC wins, is Penn State. Penn State's done everything they need to do. To your point, they've lost to 2 very good teams. They only have 2 losses. I will say they don't have a lot of great wins on the resume is the problem relative to, say, Alabama. Alabama's better wins are better than Penn State's wins. Their schedule is harder than Penn State's. And so that puts Penn State there, bracketing Clemson in my book. My number 10, if USC wins, is Tennessee. Tennessee, I view this lot, which now is almost certain to be a loss to South Carolina. I view this as bad as you want to turn back the book and talk about those Ohio State losses to Iowa or Purdue. When you're losing to a team that is a bad team, and South Carolina is a bad team this year, and you're losing by several scores, that is a huge black mark. And I know some Tennessee fans are going to be mad that I put LSU and Alabama above them. When you lose multiple games, the head-to-head starts to not matter as much because you've got to talk about all the wins and losses. Alabama's only losses are on the final play of the game to LSU and Alabama. And yes, Tennessee blew out LSU, but LSU's accomplishments the rest of the season are far more significant than what Tennessee's done. And this loss is just a big deal. And I'm always in this camp. If you lose to a bad team and you lose by a large margin to a bad team, it's just a black mark, and it has to be. Those losses have to matter. And finally, if they were to win this game, my number 10 would be UCLA. With 2 losses, with their schedule, how they've looked, I don't think Arizona's a very good team. They, losing to Oregon by a decent margin. I just don't think UCLA is as good as the teams in front of them. I can't place them as high as I would USC, who only has 1 loss. And so they end up kind of rounding out the pack at number 10, assuming they were to turn around and win this game. So that's my top 10. Forgive the USC-UCLA split, doing the best we can there. But that's where I'm at for this week. Back at number 10, assuming they were to turn around and win this game. So that's my top 10. Forgive the USC-UCLA split, doing the best we can there. But that's where I'm at for this week.
So I would give pushback on 2 things you said there. I don't think Notre Dame's a bad team. I don't think that Utah's a bad team. So I don't think those are bad losses. I think the fact that Clemson got blown out by Notre Dame is a black mark, is bad. In this one, I don't think South Carolina is a terrible team. They're 6-4 right now. They're going to be 7-4 with this win, with a chance to go 8-4 if they can beat Clemson next week. But a 7-5 team in a very tough place to get a win. I don't think it, if Tennessee lost this game 31-28, I'm not killing them for it. But it's 56-31, and one of those touchdowns was off of a freak fumble, whatever. But the first 5 possessions for South Carolina were touchdowns. They were 5 for 5 in the red zone starting out in this game. 56 points, and Carolina's going to have 2 more possessions. My issue is that they're losing by 25 points to South Carolina, who's okay. They're not a great team. They're not the worst team in the world. But 25-point loss. This does remind me of Ohio State, Iowa, Ohio State, Purdue. I think Purdue was unranked when they beat them. Absolutely reminds me of those games.
Yeah, and I mean I'll push back some. If you look at who South Carolina's actually beaten, it's Georgia State, Charlotte, South Carolina State is their first 3, Kentucky by 10. Texas A&M by 6, Vanderbilt by 11, and that's it. They were blown out 38-6 by Florida, who's not a very good team, 48-7 by Georgia, and they lost by 14 to Arkansas. So I would say any team they've played that is a top 40-ish team has beaten them by multiple touchdowns. I'm kind of with you to a certain extent. But this was a South Carolina team that looked like they were going to lose by double digits to anyone they played that was a reasonably good team, and suddenly they're going to destroy Tennessee. I don't expect South Carolina to win next week. In fact, I expect Clemson to beat them quite badly. We'll see. Maybe they've turned things around and this is a big emotional win, but I think this is more just a really bad result by Tennessee. And as you said, there's still time on the clock. I don't think Tennessee's going to make up a 25-point deficit in 7 minutes, but they can certainly dig an even bigger hole than we're talking about now. But yeah.
Ole Miss is losing to Arkansas 42-18 right now. But I get your point. I get it. I don't think South Carolina is terrible at home at night in Williams-Brice. I don't think they're terrible. I think what makes this loss a terrible loss is that it's 56-31 and Carolina has the ball. That to me is now Tennessee has given up 56 to South Carolina. They gave up 49 to Alabama. And Alabama's offense has struggled with every other team they played since Tennessee. So they've got some issues on defense that need to be looked at. Okay, that's our top tens. Josh, give me one team that's not in your top 10 right now that you think by the end of the year, by the end of bowl season, we might look at and say, hey, they're pretty good.
You know, that's a solid question. I mean, the obvious one that we're leaving out right now is Oregon. Oregon still has to play Utah. They have to play Oregon State, and I can't remember, but I think they have a good shot at the making the Pac-12 title if everything falls their way. Um, that would be my odds on one of the one that's not getting a ton of discussion right now. If they were to finish out strong, and win the Pac-12 title versus USC and UCLA that are making our top tens, then obviously they're one that should get a lot of consideration.
All right, that's it for us for our top 10s. Give us your top 10s in the comments, and you can tell us where we've messed up or if Tennessee comes ahead and ends up winning this game down 25 with 5 minutes left. Then all bets are off. Thanks so much, y'all, for watching this one. Have a great week, and God bless.